Hi there, my name's Christina Sameli. I'm 34 years old and this is my story. I grew up in a home. I'm the youngest of 4. Mum, Dad, we grew up as Catholics, followed the ways of the Catholic Church. I followed my mum, what my mum wanted me to do. If I can backtrack a little bit, my earliest memory, my earliest traumatic memory would have been when I was about 8 years old. So I've got family that live in Leicester, and because I was the youngest, I kind of got left out a lot. So my siblings, there's a massive age gap between us, and so I didn't really have anyone to play with like that. And so my auntie from Leicester, she had 2 sons, and I used to adore them, and so she would always take me, and she would take me Easter holidays, half terms, and this particular time it was the summer holidays. And so I went up there to stay with my auntie, my uncle, my cousins. And I remember I grew up being quite an insecure child because in primary school I got bullied quite a lot. And I didn't really have to do anything. I was bullied because I was too tall. I was bullied because my nails were too long. I was just bullied for the craziest things. And little kids can be quite brutal. And I was that sort of child. I was quite sensitive. I was quite needy in terms of wanting friends, and so I just used to get bullied and I would never fight back. I'd just cry, and so this pattern, this sort of thing would happen to me. So I guess my mum said, you know what, let her go stay with auntie. So I went up there, went to Leicester, and this particular night my cousin, at the time he was 15, I was 8, and I remember he called me into his room. And he was like, oh, Chris, how are you? I'll never forget this. You know, I've got a girlfriend. I was like, okay, girlfriend. And he starts telling me that there's this thing that he wants to do with his girlfriend, but that he wants to try it on me. And so I thought, okay. Now, thinking back, as an 8-year-old child, I was confused. I do remember looking at him, confused. I do remember not quite understanding what he meant, but he told me that he would come back to my room at night. So that night, I remember I had my little Walkman. I know it's very old. I had my CD, I was playing Ashanti, something like that. And at that age, I loved music growing up. I remember listening to my Walkman, and I fell asleep with my headphones in. And then I heard someone come in my room. Then I felt someone get into the bed. And he woke me up, and it was my cousin. He woke me up, and he said, okay, so we're gonna do this thing. And I said, okay, what's this thing? And he basically he got on top of me. I didn't know what was going on. I was deeply confused. I was deeply scared, but I trusted him because he was my cousin. I looked up to him, I loved him, and I knew he loved me. And so he got on top of me, and then he got a football sock, because he used to play football. And he put the sock in my mouth, and he told me, leave it there. And then, you know, before you knew it, I was feeling excruciating pain. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew it shouldn't have been happening. And so I was begging him to stop. And then at that point, the bedroom door opened, and I looked and I saw it was my auntie, but she never came in. She just stayed at the door. And she said, Christina, are you all right? And I was like, yeah. And he shook me, tell me to say yes, say you're fine. So I said, yeah, I'm okay, auntie. And she just left. And from that moment on, I'm not gonna lie, I was angry at my auntie, because in my mind, she could have saved me. She could have stopped this from happening. So I remember getting suffocated with a pillow, during this ordeal, during this thing that was happening to me, during this abuse. And in the morning, I got up, I remember going to the bathroom and there was just tears like dried on my face. And I was looking in the mirror and I remember, you know, sorry for being graphic, but there was just blood everywhere. And at that age, you're thinking you're gonna die. To be honest, I actually thought I was gonna die. I locked myself in the bathroom. I remember just staying in there for so long that my auntie started banging on the door, like, Christina, what's going on? Why are you in there? Anyway, that day, my cousin threatened me not to say anything. He told me if I say anything, that I will ruin the family. So this was a heavy secret that I had to carry. And not only did it happen that day, but it actually happened about 4 or 5 other times during that time being there. So I just, you know, I even snuck out of my room at night and I went to try and sleep on my auntie's floor just to get away from him, and he still found me there, brought me back to the bedroom. It sounds insane, but that memory will never leave me. And so I grew up with this confusion, and this confusion was that sex was love. Now, I didn't actually know he had sex with me, but when I got to school, you know, you do sex education, you do all these things. So I started to understand what had happened to me. But I said to myself, I would never tell anyone. But what I did was I used to write it down. I'd write it down in my little diaries because it was a way for me to get it out. And so I would do this constantly, writing. And then I started writing songs because it was a way for me to release some pain. And I was just so into music. Anyway, growing up, I was terrified of guys. Absolutely terrified. If there were boys on this side of the road and I was coming from school, I'd cross over. You know, I'd make myself look crazy just so that no boys would approach me. I was so afraid of the opposite sex. When I found out what had happened to me, I vowed I would never tell a soul. I remember just having this 11, 12 years old, another cousin had come to live with us from a different country, and again I was sexually abused by him. And I remember thinking that there must be something I'm doing to make these people do this to me. There must be something that I'm doing, it's my fault. So I got really angry with myself, and I used to self-harm. I became quite angry. I used to stick myself in the arm with sharp objects. I used to punch myself in the stomach. I used to look in the mirror and say, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, it's your fault. I was abusing myself at such a young age and I didn't even realize it. And I realized at that point that I didn't really want to live anymore. And the reason I didn't want to live anymore was because everybody thought I was okay, but behind closed doors, I was a very upset child. So I got to about 13 years old, friends all around, people getting boyfriends, going, you know, little youth raves. And so I decided, yeah, why not? And all my friends, they were getting boyfriends and I was still really scared. But I thought, but this is what I have to do. Everyone else is doing it. So I said, okay. So we went to a rave. I remember meeting this guy and young boy, me and him were about 14. And I remember, you know, I started to be his girlfriend, going out with him. And I thought, yeah, I've accomplished something. But the same thought was in my mind, and that was sex is love. I can't explain to you why that was communicated to me in that way, but it was like I have to give myself. I can't say no. And so this boy at 14, he was extremely forward. And I remember him, you know, coming to my mum's house, my mum thinking we were just little kids. Yeah, she'd let us go upstairs. And, you know, before you knew it, I engaged in these sexual acts with this boy. And I remember feeling dirty. I remember feeling like, I don't want to do this. But if I don't, he's not going to want to be with me. If I don't, he's not going to want me. And so I just did it. And I thought, this is how I need to show love. This is how I do it. But every time it would happen afterwards, at night, I would feel really depressed. I'd go back to feeling really suicidal. And then I started looking up ways of killing yourself without having to feel the pain. And so I was getting really into this suicide thing. I was almost planning when I was going to take my life. So fast forward to about 15 years old, I started getting involved in the wrong crowds. But by this time, I was getting pretty angry. I kind of felt like I just wanted to fight all the time. I wanted to argue. I would argue with my mum, my dad. I was constantly getting into arguments and physical altercations with my dad. And I didn't care. I didn't care. I was so angry. But nobody knew why. They just thought I was a teenager growing up. So they just, you know, she'll grow out of it. But deep down, I was angry. I was angry at everyone because I felt like somebody should have known what was happening to me. And so I got involved in the wrong crowd, ended up, you know, chilling on the roads, like you would call it, going out on the streets, chilling with these guys in an area called Pembury Estate. And I considered myself to be protected because I was around these boys who carried guns, knives, sold drugs. I felt like these were tough guys, I won't get hurt. And in that, I started to become quite tomboyish myself. I started to wear boxer shorts. I started to wear guy trousers. I started to, at the same time, I was wearing belly tops. So I was quite revealing, but then I was quite tomboyish. And I had this weird complex going on. Now looking back, I think it was just an image so that I didn't get taken advantage of, so I could look tough. And so I carried this way. These guys that I was around, they would get me to set people up for them. So I would meet someone online, I would get them to meet me somewhere, and then they would get robbed by these guys, they'd get beat up and all sorts of things. And I remember doing this for a period of time, and then it got to a point where I almost got arrested because one of the boys' family members got involved. Police was coming to a house that I stayed at. I had to flee. It was a madness. But I still didn't want to leave the boys. I thought, this is the life, man. This is protection. This is what you need. And so 15, 16 years old, I remember just kind of chilling with them, staying with them. But at the same time, I wanted a boyfriend because a lot of my friends had boyfriends. I wanted to, again, get into a relationship. And so I remember I was coming from college and this guy came up on his bike and I was like, oh, who's he? Anyway, he stopped me and we started talking. And I remember, yeah, you know what? I'm going to start being the ruthless one. I'm just going to play multiple guys. I'm just going to have every guy just giving me what I want. And so that's what I started to do. You know, I would link at least 5 different guys. I was getting money, I was getting this, I was getting that, getting them to buy me this, getting them to buy me that. But I thought I was in control, but I definitely wasn't. I was definitely sinking deeper and deeper into depression because I was still giving myself. I was still doing these things, thinking I'm in control, but I'm not. You know, I said, okay, guys want to play, I'm going to be the player. But I wasn't being it. I was playing myself. So I got to a point where I thought I was so great. I thought I was just, you know. And then I met this one guy. And at 16 years old, honestly, it felt like he just completely captivated me. I couldn't explain it. I don't know what it was, but I really just wanted to give him my all. And I dropped everyone else. And I remember being with this guy and he was also involved in gangs and violence and drugs, and I would hold his drugs in my house, living with my family. I would do anything for him. I had guns in my room. I had anything he wanted me to do, I would do. And it got to a point where he would tell me to jump and I'd ask how high. But then he was also on the flip side quite abusive, quite verbally abusive. You know, sometimes he would hit me with belts. Sometimes he would grab me by my neck, push me against the wall, and then he would tell me he loves me. So there was this weird thing happening, and I didn't know how to walk away because I thought I loved him. And at this young age, 16 years old, where I've gone through so much confusion, I just thought I need to stay with this one. I can't walk away. I have to remain. So I got into a bit of a situation where although I was with him, I still had this other guy on the side. And I remember every time we had an argument, I would go to him. And I thought, well, it's just one, it's okay. But I ended up, basically a mistake happened, and I ended up sleeping with both of them, and I didn't know who the father of my child was because I had gotten pregnant. I found out I had gotten pregnant, 16 years old. You know, my cycle hasn't come. I'm feeling weird. I'm feeling sick. I'm feeling like something's wrong. And I'm like, okay, something is wrong. And so I had older cousins who got me a pregnancy test, and it was revealed that I was pregnant. And at 16 years old, you're very immature. I was very immature. I was very like, I'm not having this child and no one's gonna find out. So my cousins said, just go to the Homerton hospital, sign yourself up for an abortion, and it's gonna be all over. So that's what I did. I took along a little cousin of mine. I went there. On my way there, I remember my boyfriend came and he was going mad, and he was like, oh, I knew he was this, I knew he was that. And he just came out of nowhere and he just followed me all the way to the hospital. I was getting tormented by him in the clinic. I signed it. I said, no, I'm not having this child. And that was it. And a few weeks later, I had to admit myself into the hospital. And I can tell you now, I've never been through such a, well, I've been through traumatic situations, but this was something I had inflicted upon myself. The pain, I remember passing out. I remember feeling like, this is it, I'm gonna die. But I also had to give birth to a stillborn. And at that moment, I can honestly tell you, I did not recognize myself. I remember looking in the mirror of the hospital and thinking, who are you? But at the same time, I almost felt like something had come inside of me, just more anger. So from that moment on, I would get on a bus, I'd start a fight. The whole bus was shut down. I get on a train, I'm starting a fight. They'd call the police to come take me off. My mum, my sisters, my brother, nobody wanted to be around me because I was angry. And it got to the point where, yeah, you just looked at me, I wanted to fight. I just wanted to fight. I wanted somebody else to feel the pain I was feeling. And so I went through this. Didn't tell anybody I had an abortion. 17 years old, I meet this other guy. And at this point, I was like, okay, no, I need to stay with one. But this one was extremely, extremely captivating. I don't know what it was again about this one. This time I definitely had no others and it was just him. But it got worse, the abuse with this one got worse. But at the same time, I couldn't take myself away and I got pregnant again at 17 years old. And I remember just thinking, no, I need to remain with this guy because now I'm having his baby. Told my family, they all went crazy, but I said, I'm not getting rid of this child. They didn't know why I was so adamant, but I knew why. And I kept my baby. And at 17, I was flat. No one could tell I was pregnant, but I was about 5-6 months pregnant. My family were angry with me. They would call me the black sheep, the deaf child, the one that's gonna kill everyone. But I didn't care. I was like, I'm keeping my child. So at 17, I had a baby boy. And I was with this guy, you know, we tried to parent together and do all these things, but he was very unfaithful and he was just, you know, a ladies' man. So it's like, he just loved the girls. And I knew that, but I still stayed with him. And I went through this cycle of depression and anger, and I went right back to being suicidal. And this guy, you know, he used to sell drugs, he used to do all these things, he was out on the roads. And I just knew there was just this one night that he was out and he weren't answering his phone. I was like, here we go again, you know? So I said, you know what, forget it. Forget life, forget everything, bun everyone. That means forget everyone. I'm just gonna take my life, die, and when I'm dead and they find me dead, everybody that's ever done anything to me will regret it. That's what I could hear. So I remember sitting in my room, it was dark, my baby was in the cot. I turned off the lights and I kid you not, I could hear voices. And when I tell people this, they're like, what do you mean? I could hear voices in my room. And I could almost see like there were eyes in the pitch black. I could see eyes. I could see someone, it was like somebody was talking to me and telling me, just kill yourself. And if you kill yourself, everybody, it was almost repeating what I said to myself. Everybody will be angry. Everybody will be sad. Everybody would realize what they've done to you. And I was responding. I was like, yeah, it's true. Everyone will be angry. And I remember sitting there. I went to the cupboard, my mum's cupboard. She's got high blood pressure. She's got all sorts of things. I just grabbed all her tablets. I went back to my room and I sat on my bed. And as I sat on my bed, my phone started ringing and it was a private number. So I thought, who's this? Because my boyfriend's not home. I thought it might be him. So I answered the phone and it was the police, and they told me that we've got your boyfriend, he's in the cell, but don't worry, we're gonna let him out, it's fine. So I'm panicking, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen here? Because he had gotten arrested before, so I thought this is it, he's done. And so somehow, some way, I fell asleep that night. I remembered I didn't touch the tablets, I didn't overdose, I stayed there, I fell asleep on the floor, woke up in the morning, my boyfriend walks in and he just looks weird. He just looks different. And I'm like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I had the maddest thing happen to me. So he starts telling me that he was arrested, he got put into the van, and he got beat up by the police. But then he also said that he prayed. And he said he sat in the cell and he said, Jesus, if you're real, get me out of here and I'll change. Now, his mum was a Christian. His mum was going to a church called the Potter's House. And she kept telling him, you need to get saved, you need to come to church. And so at that point, he just thought, you know what, I need to cry out to God. Because he knew he was going to go away. He said he prayed and he said, Jesus, if you're real, get me out. He said the next morning, the police officers gave him his bike, they punctured his wheels, gave him his bag. He had Class A drugs, he had a knife, he had everything that should have put him away, but they said, you can go, get out of here before we change our mind. Now that to me was extremely confusing. I looked at him and I was like, what do you mean? He said, I'm gonna go to church. I said, okay. And at the time, being a Catholic, you know, growing up in that, I just thought, okay, you do your thing. I stopped going to church, by the way, but I thought I was okay. Something in me thought, you're okay, you don't need to go to church anymore. You're good, you were baptized as a baby. But when he said he wanted to go to church, I thought, this is weird. And so he went and he came back home in the afternoon. And again, he just looked even more different. He was smiling. He was happy. Never seen him smile. Never seen him happy like that. And I thought, what's going on? You know, who's in that church? Do I need to come? And so he goes, yeah, I want you to come. I said, okay. And so I said, all right, I'll follow you. So I took our baby. We went, walked into this basketball hall. It was like a gym hall. And I remember we sat down and there was a screen and there was like this movie, and this movie was about being fatherless. And although I'd grown up with my dad, prior to me coming, maybe a few weeks to me coming to the church building, I found out that my dad wasn't my real dad. And I'd found out that my actual biological father was in fact my godfather. A whole story there, but I just remembered being really confused, and I was angry. So it was almost in time, that video, and I watched it and I was angry. I didn't feel like I belonged to anyone. I felt like everybody thought I was this hype, jolly girl, but behind closed doors I wasn't. Anyway, the pastor spoke and he said, if you're depressed, if you're suicidal, if you're feeling, and I looked at my boyfriend and I said, you told them about me. And he was like, what? No. So we're having an argument in church and everyone's looking at us, but I'm like, you told them about my life. And he goes, what are you talking about? And anyway, I just said, don't worry, after. So we put our heads down. He said, look, if you want to accept Christ today, if you want to get saved. And I thought, wow, okay, this is interesting. And I kid you not, I sat there and I heard, you tried alcohol, you tried weed, you tried guys, you tried all these different things. Why are you afraid to try God? And I said, yeah, it's true, man. And I just shot my hand up and I said, I'll come up. And I went up and I went to the front and the pastor prayed, led me in something called a sinner's prayer. And I repented of my sin. And I kid you not, it was like this weight just lifted. I can't explain it. Didn't know it was there, but it just lifted. I remember walking outside. I remember looking at the clouds like, rah, there's clouds. I remember looking at people, like, these are people. I remember looking at the trees like, oh my gosh, there's trees. And it might sound a bit crazy and strange, but for me, it was like I was new. Something had taken place. I could now see the world for what it was. I could see people for what it was. And I understood that I was a person. I understood that a soul was real. Something just dropped, and I knew I was forgiven. I knew I was forgiven. I knew that I could forgive others for what they had done to me. And there was just this release. And I remember from that day, I was 19 years old. And from that day forward, nobody could have told me that God wasn't real. Just certain things that had just dropped off me, certain things that I didn't want to do anymore. I remember my boyfriend, I said, look, I think you need to move out. He moved out. I remember saying, look, I don't even want to rave anymore. I stopped raving. Some of my friends thought I was crazy. They were like, what's going on? I stopped smoking, I stopped drinking. I even cleaned out my wardrobe, like I grabbed all my clothes. I was like, this needs to change. Like, I can't be showing my body this way anymore. I just felt like a dignity had come upon me. I felt whole. I felt like this body was worth covering. I honestly felt that way. And I got rid of all of that stuff. I threw it outside, not in my house. I went outside, I ran to another bin and I threw it outside. I got rid of all my CDs, my music. I worshipped my music, but I said, I can't listen to this. It took maybe about 8 months, but I knew I couldn't listen to this anymore. I knew what it was doing to me. I started writing songs. I started writing songs about my life, about who I was. Started writing songs about knowing that Christ loves me, Jesus loves me, I'm a new creation. And these things were just coming to me, but it was all because I realized my worth. I realized that I was a person and I was somebody who Jesus Christ died for and loved. And at that point, people around me started getting saved, like my friends, people, my family members. I was inviting them to church because they could see the change. And from that moment on, nobody could tell me that God wasn't real. I'm 34 now. I look back, I'm now married, I have 3 children. You know, I'm in my right mind, no longer suicidal, no longer trying to take my life, no longer trying to, you know, or questioning what my life is about. I know I have a purpose. And more importantly, I know Jesus loves me. I have a personal relationship with him. It's not just about going to church on a Sunday. You know, I know when I die, heaven will be my home. I have that surety. I know that, you know, he loves people. He loves people where they're at, no matter what they've done, no matter what they've said, no matter how, you know, he loves people. And because of that, I just had this love for people. And so I hope that this story has in some way, shape or form touched you. Maybe you can relate. Maybe there's something in here. Maybe there's not everything, but there might be something. But I just want to tell you, Jesus Christ is real and he's changed my life. He saved me. He set me on a new path. And if you don't know Jesus, please